$214. Not what you owe, what's left. Every month, after you handed $1,340 to a man named Dennis, who raised your rent 17% the year his vacation photos showed him somewhere in the Maldives, you had $214 left to exist on. You'd seen Dennis twice in 4 years. Once when you moved in, once when the pipe under the kitchen sink burst and he stood in your doorway in a fleece vest, told you he'd get someone out, and didn't for 11 days. What you hated wasn't Dennis. What you hated was the arrangement. The quiet, totally legal, completely normalized arrangement where someone who owned something could extract the life out of someone who didn't, month after month, without ever really having to think about you at all. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not a movie scene, just a Tuesday, just $214. Just a slow, nauseating realization that you were the product in someone else's business model. You were 26, logistics coordinator at a distribution company in Columbus, Ohio. $51,000 a year, the kind of job your parents called stable with a reverence that made you feel guilty for not feeling grateful. You weren't ungrateful, you were paying attention. Around month 18 in that building on Brent Haven Drive, you stopped looking at rent as a bill and started looking at it as a transaction. And once you see a transaction, you can't unsee it. You start asking questions that feel almost rude. Who owns this? What does it actually make? You pulled county property records, tax filings, landlord forums where property owners discussed depreciation strategies and debt service ratios. You read those forums the way a soldier reads the enemy's field manual. The building had 12 units. Average rent, $1,190. That was $171,360 a year in gross rents. Dennis had bought it for $480,000 19 years ago. His mortgage, based on public records, was nearly gone. You ran the numbers at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday with a bowl of cold pasta next to you. He was clearing $8,000 to $10,000 a month, net, after everything. You sat with that for a long time. The first rule that nobody puts in the headline: most people spend their entire lives funding someone else's financial strategy without ever being told that's what they're doing. You were doing it. Marcus in 2A was doing it. Priya in 7B was doing it. All 12 units collectively were turning Dennis's long-ago investment into a machine that ran entirely on the quiet financial desperation of people who had never been shown another option. The question wasn't whether you were angry, the question was what you were going to do with the information. You built a net worth tracker one weekend out of mild self-punishment. You wanted the real number. Assets, $6,200 in savings, $3,800 in a 401k, a car worth $7,400. Total, $17,400. Liabilities, $22,100 in student loans at 6.8%. 2 credit cards totaling $2,600. Total, $26,700. Net worth, negative $9,300. You closed the laptop, then opened it again because looking away felt like the kind of thing that kept you exactly where you were. Negative $9,300 at 26, after doing everything more or less correctly by every standard you'd been handed. That was the moment the old story permanently stopped making sense. You gave yourself 1 year, not to get rich, just to change the direction. You cut the credit cards to zero over 7 months through something close to aggressive boredom. The $14 cocktails, the weekend trips you couldn't afford, the phone upgrade 14 months too early. None of it felt worth trading anymore. By month 11, you had $11,400 saved. The morning you crossed $10,000, a Saturday, checking your app almost by accident, you sat in your car in a Kroger parking lot for 4 minutes, doing nothing. No music, no phone. It felt less like celebration and more like oxygen, like something pressing on your chest for years had lifted exactly 1 inch. You started attending a real estate investor meetup every second Tuesday of the month at a Hampton Inn off Route 40. 40 people, mostly men in their 40s who had figured things out. A woman named Carol who owned 11 units and spoke like someone who forgot the basics weren't obvious. A younger guy named Trevor who asked the questions you were too self-conscious to ask yet. You listened for 3 months before you said much of anything. You learned the vocabulary. NOI, cap rate, DSCR. You learned that an FHA loan let owner-occupants buy small multifamily properties with 3.5% down. You learned that the gap between renting and owning was never really about income, it was knowing which tools existed and who could access them. Then you found it. A 6-unit on Millard Avenue, 4 blocks from Brent Haven Drive. Owner, Gerald Koss, 71, held it since 1998. No mortgage on record for 12 years. Managed by a company taking 9% off the top. Gerald wasn't a villain, Gerald was tired. He had a building that kept sending him checks and no particular urgency to do anything about it. What Gerald didn't have was someone with a clean offer and a quiet kind of seriousness. You had $22,000. You wrote him a letter, not an email, a letter, 2 pages, handwritten on the first, typed on the second because your handwriting fell apart after the first paragraph. You told him who you were, why you wanted this building specifically, and that you were open to creative structures if a traditional sale didn't suit him. You mailed it on a Wednesday. Gerald called 11 days later from a landline. You could tell by the faint hiss behind his voice. He was direct. Not warm, not cold. He didn't want to list it, didn't want tenants getting anxious. He needed discretion, a slow close, no broker if both parties could handle the paperwork. You said that sounded reasonable. He named $490,000. You asked if he'd consider carrying a portion of the financing. A pause. Then, how much of a portion? You said enough that neither of us has to fight a bank about it. He laughed, short, dry, and said he'd call you back. 4 conversations, 9 weeks. You put $19,500 down. Gerald carried $90,000 in seller financing at 5.5% over 10 years. The remaining $380,500 came from a community bank willing to lend against the building's income rather than your salary alone because the DSCR covered the debt service comfortably. Combined monthly payments, $3,840. Gross rents, $7,800. Operating expenses, $1,900. Monthly cash flow, $2,060. You moved into Unit 1. Effective rent, 0. The $1,340 you'd been paying Dennis every month for 4 years was now yours. The closing was a Thursday at 2:30 p.m. The notary's name was Bethany. She had a small succulent on her desk. Gerald signed first, shook your hand, said good luck, and left. You sat in your car in the parking lot the same way you'd sat at the Kroger the day you crossed $10,000. But different. There was no party. You hadn't told anyone, not your parents who would have worried, not your coworkers who wouldn't have understood, not your friends who would have responded with either uncomfortable jealousy or doubt dressed as concern. 6 weeks after closing, you drove past Brent Haven Drive on a Saturday. Didn't plan to. The cracked concrete on Dennis's front steps was still there, same as when you moved in 5 years ago. The mailboxes still didn't close properly. You drove past slowly and felt something you couldn't have named before. Not superiority, clarity. You could see both sides now, simultaneously. You understood Dennis. You understood the arrangement. You understood that the only way out was never to fight the structure, but to learn it well enough to step inside it. The second rule is the one nobody says in the finance videos. Real wealth doesn't announce itself. It shows up in a spreadsheet at midnight. It shows up in a phone call from a tired old man on a landline. It shows up in the quiet after a closing when you're sitting alone in a parking lot trying to feel something big enough to match what just happened. 14 months later, your net worth was $114,000. Positive. You typed it on a Sunday afternoon and felt something closer to vertigo than celebration. You'd spent 4 years being the person trying to escape something. That identity, built entirely around getting out, had kept you sharp, kept you moving. But now you were out, and there was a strange hollowness where the urgency used to live. The shift showed up in small ways. You'd walk into a restaurant and look at the building before the menu. Who owned this?
leased or owned by the operator, cost per foot in this neighborhood. Your brain had been rewired by 3 years of looking at properties and couldn't stop. A coworker named Phil, 43, 2 kids, perpetually stressed, mentioned refinancing his mortgage to consolidate credit card debt and asked what you thought. You told him accurately and briefly. He nodded and changed the subject. Later, you understood. He hadn't wanted your opinion, he wanted sympathy. He wanted someone to confirm the system was difficult and his situation was reasonable. You'd given him information. Those aren't the same thing. People didn't want the map. They wanted company on the wrong road. The third rule is the loneliness rule. Nobody warns you. When you're broke, financial stress is communal. Everyone around you is also stretched, also quietly terrified before payday. That shared stress creates a bond, a language, a set of jokes. When you start building actual assets, not income, not a raise, that shared bond frays, not because you change toward people, because the shared reference point disappears. You found the Millard Avenue closing impossible to mention at work. There was no landing place for it. You sat with Trevor sometimes. 2 real conversations with Carol. You emailed with a woman named Dominique who just closed on her first duplex in Akron and asked if the loneliness got better. You told her the truth. It doesn't go away. You just get used to carrying it. You found it the same way you found the first, not through a listing, through patience and public records. A 4-unit on Carver Street, 8 blocks from Millard. Owner Sandra Okafa, 64, had inherited it from her mother and managed it from a distance, badly, not maliciously. 2 units were below market because she hadn't raised rent in 6 years. One tenant, Ray, 11 years in the building, paying $740 a month in a neighborhood where $1,050 was the floor. You wrote Sandra a letter in March. She called within a week and asked directly, "What would you do about Ray?" You told her the truth. You'd raise his rent, gradually, over 2 years, with notice and transparency. Keeping Ray at $740 wasn't kindness, it was an invisible subsidy that made the building impossible to run sustainably. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a more honest answer than I expected." Asking price $380,000, negotiated to $362,000. You put $18,000 down. Sandra carried $72,000 at 5% over 8 years. The same community bank handled the rest. Cash flow thin at first, $190 a month. But that wasn't the point. 2 properties appreciating simultaneously, in a neighborhood up 4.1% annually for 6 straight years. Depreciation on taxes. Sandra's note paid off in 8 years, leaving $1,800 in monthly cash flow at conservative rent projections. You weren't buying cash flow. You were buying time and turning it into an asset. The one thing Dennis had always understood that you hadn't. That winter, a woman named Kezia moved into Unit 2 on Carver Street. 24, 2 jobs, dental receptionist days, restaurant 3 nights a week. Her rent was $1,020, the top of her budget. 3 months in, she emailed asking about a loud bathroom exhaust fan that kept her awake on day sleep after night shifts. You had someone there in 48 hours. $220 repair. Her thank you email felt a slightly too grateful, the way people thank you when experience has trained them to expect less. You recognized it immediately. You had written that email. You had been that tenant. The 4th rule is about what you owe, not legally, something harder. You got here through your own discipline and choices, yes, but also through Gerald's phone call, Sandra's honesty, a community bank that looked at income instead of just salary, Trevor asking questions in a room where you were too self-conscious to ask them yourself, Carol answering without condescension. A set of invisible conditions that aligned in ways they don't for everyone. Knowing that, really knowing it, not as an abstract acknowledgement but as a felt truth, changes what you do with what you've built. When Dominique emails from Akron at 10 p.m. about debt service ratios, you answer, fully. When your cousin Marcus asks at Thanksgiving how you afford your place, you tell him the real version. The spreadsheets, the county records, the Hampton Inn meetings, the letters mailed on Wednesdays, all of it. Because the information isn't supposed to stop with you. 2 properties, 10 units, Net worth $190,000 and climbing. You still work the same job, $54,500. Same cubicle. Nobody at work knows. Your manager doesn't know. The guy next to you who just signed a new lease and mentioned his landlords seem nice, he has no idea. You're already watching a third property, mixed-use building 2 miles from Millard. Owner Arthur, 78, held it since 1994. No mortgage, no urgency. You're going to write him a letter on a Wednesday. Dennis is still on Brent Haven Drive, 12 units. The concrete on the front steps still hasn't been fixed. Somewhere in one of those units right now, someone is sitting at a kitchen table doing the math on what's left after rent, looking at a number that feels like a wall. The only question that has ever mattered is whether they decide that wall is a permanent fact of life, or a door they just haven't found the handle on yet.